Everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Wednesday's middle of the week edition of Alaska Weather, 22nd day of December now, 2021. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, hosting today's show. Up first weather graphic, we've got the hazardous weather graphic showing blizzard warning for St. Lawrence Island, shaded in red there on the Bering Strait coast. That's out until 9 p.m. this evening, and 4 to 7 inches or more of snow total falling in that area, with winds gusting 55 miles an hour, creating whiteout conditions with the heavy snow that they've been reporting. Savunga, heavy snow, quarter mile or less in heavy snow all afternoon. A lot of wind with that. And down to the south, we've got a winter storm warning that's out until 9 p.m. this evening as well for the Yukon Delta and lower Yukon River Valley area. 6 to 9 inches of snow total, come 9 p.m. with 35 mile an hour winds, creating quite an area of blowing snow with that. Otherwise, winter weather advisories out, Galena and over toward the eastern Norton Sound area, south coast of Seward Peninsula, Nome to White Mountain, Golovin, those areas of Norton Bay. Winter weather advisories for snow and blowing snow in that location, again out until probably through most of the night tonight, and improving from west to east toward morning. And from there, we've got winter weather advisories out for late tonight and tomorrow through tomorrow afternoon there for the coast, central and south coast of the Panhandle. Some moisture coming into the interior, dropping southeastward, will clip the coast there with 2 to 5 inches of snow starting late tonight, and should end, say, 4 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. That's when the advisory is due to end. Again, 2 to 5 inches of snow from Sitka to Port Alexander, Craig, Kalawak, all the way down to Heidelberg. And from there, satellite imagery showing low pressure pretty vividly now along the Russian coast there, lifting east-northeastward, the front pushing north of St. Lawrence Island, or roughly near St. Lawrence Island, picture time here, and the higher cloud deck, though, north of the island there, pushing into the interior, big slug of moisture coming in. Some pretty good snowfall amounts along the Kuskokwim Valley today. Precipitation amounts, Bethel picked up just under 9/10 of an inch in the last 12 hours of water equivalent precipitation that fell in the form of snow mostly, and also freezing rain and rain. There's temperatures rose into about the mid-30s this afternoon. Otherwise, Aniak, Kalskag, snow, just plain snow, 3 to 6 inches or more falling there on up in toward, or over towards Sleepmute, began to taper off 1 to 2 inches there at the Sparravon, about the same in the last 12 hours. And otherwise, clearing out over the Panhandle as the showers move off to the southeast, well south of Queen Charlotte's now, well out of the area, but moisture starting to increase there off the north coast, and that'll continue to increase and link up with the moisture coming down out of the interior, moving eastward. It'll turn southeastward, and that's what's expected to bring the snow just clipping the coastline. A little farther to the west, and it may miss you altogether and just be staying in the cold air. And rolling this again, you can see the front kind of hanging up there over the central Aleutians around Adak and Atka, southwest flow, periods of rain going on there. And one more time, you can see on the Arctic coast, still getting clipped, really strong winds. Blizzard, I forgot to mention the, blizzard warning going until, I believe, actually, I mentioned that 55 mile an hour or gust to 40 miles an hour for the eastern Arctic coast for this evening, but gradually improving up there. Had winds gust to 55 miles an hour today at, over toward Barter Island, Kaktovik, or at Barter Island, Kaktovik. And that diminishes as you head westward, so about 35 miles an hour at Dead Horse, and then lighter over toward the central coast. And conditions improve. We got the snow and blowing snow moving into the Seward Peninsula as that low tracks into Norton Bay, Norton Sound. And warm front moisture spreading snow, possibly getting into Crook Inlet late in the afternoon today. Clear over the Panhandle. And moving on, forecast for tonight, that low tracks eastward in toward, the Tanana Valley. Could cross the Fairbanks area. Look up and you see the big red low go by. Otherwise, periods of snow, a widespread area of snow over the central southern interior. Lighter amounts, though, south of the Alaska Range, east of the Alaska Range with that downsloping off the mountains there. But Copper River Basin should see some snow. And then the moisture starting to gather that low pressure area off the southeast coast. And we'll see you get some snow as that passes on down to the southeast there, clipping mostly the outer coastline. Could get some snow showers farther to the east. At this point, could go either way. Snow and blowing snow to a lesser extent eastern Arctic coast, and still snow over the central interior, and starting to clear out colder, windier Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, more warm air and moisture pushing up toward the Aleutians. And then for Friday, that pushes right up into the southwest coast, rain, Bering Sea, up to Nunivak Island, snow changing to rain, and also along the coastline. And cold and dry and windy for the Panhandle. Lows tonight, 7 up over the northern Panhandle to upper 20s along the central coast. Otherwise, mid-30s for Kodiak Island, upper 20s Bristol Bay. Highs tomorrow, mid-30s Bristol Bay, near 40 Kodiak Island, on up to Seldovia and Homer, but mid to upper 20s south central Alaska, near 20 in the Susitna Valley, above 0 in the Copper River Basin, below freezing all of the southeast coast. Lows 0 to 5 parts of the Panhandle. Everywhere should fall below 20 degrees, a little below 0 Copper River Basin, northern Kuskokwim Valley, but right around freezing for Kodiak. Highs near 40 for Kodiak on Friday. Single numbers in teens for the Panhandle with windy conditions. And up north, lows 30 35 below northeast interior. Otherwise, just a shade below 0 in the central interior out to the Bering Strait. And then highs tomorrow right around 0 to 5 central interior, below 0, 5 to 15 below up to the Arctic coast. Followed by lows a little colder, 15 to 20 below in the central interior. Followed by highs generally below 0.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, marginal VFR, North Slope Arctic coast, and then the Brooks Range south into the northern Kobuk, Koyukuk, upper Yukon valleys, VFR on out to the northwest coast. IFR, central interior, right on down to the Alaska Range and the Aleutian Range. VFR, southern Bering Sea, including the Pribilovs. Marginal VFR and IFR, central eastern Aleutians. Marginal for the Alaska Peninsula. IFR, eastern Copper River Basin, Yakutat into the northern Panhandle. And for the afternoon, IFR, eastern Arctic coast, North Slope, otherwise marginal VFR right down to the Brooks Range, south of the mountains, though. Yukon River Valley, VFR until you get to the lower valley and out to the delta. Areas of IFR, Kuskokwim Mountains, IFR down to Bethel. Marginal VFR, Togiak Bay, Bristol Bay. Some IFR lingering over the Aleutian Range and along and just west of the western Alaska Range. IFR just south of St. Lawrence Island. Huge area of IFR now spreading in, covering all of the Aleutians, spreading into the Alaska Peninsula and up over the southern Bering Sea. And you can see that just expands, covering all of the Bering Sea, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, pushing into the Kuskokwim Valley, southern Norton Sound, across St. Lawrence Island, Bristol Bay, and then just to the east, VFR, Kodiak Island, east of the Alaska Range, south central Alaska, eastward, down across all the Panhandle, VFR. Otherwise, some marginal VFR up around the greater Fairbanks area, VFR along the Yukon River to the Brooks Range, marginal VFR, eastern Arctic coast, central eastern North Slope. Friday afternoon, not too bad over the interior, central or northern interior and the east side there, or east of the Alaska Range. Got some marginal VFR up toward McKinley Park into the, Nenana, Fairbanks, maybe Delta Junction, northeastward there, the White Mountains around Chena. And IFR, pretty well entrenched over the southwest interior, right across Kuskokwim Valley, St. Lawrence Island, all of the Bering Sea and Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula to Sitkinak Island. Marginal VFR spreading across the southwest part of Kodiak Island. And for passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR with IFR in the northern entrance. Lower conditions on the north side for Adigan as well. Better south entrance. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, lingering IFR, both western approaches, otherwise becoming marginal VFR for the passes themselves. And same pattern for Rainy, lowest conditions west side, better on the eastern entrance. Windy, starting out IFR, improving throughout the day, becoming VFR. And an upward trend for Isabel as well. Those conditions early on, becoming VFR into the and through the afternoon. Mentasta, slower, starting out IFR, may only become VFR, or maybe only become marginal VFR. And for Tanita, marginal VFR to VFR, probably before noon. And Portage, same thing, early marginal VFR, lower conditions possible, maybe even possible IFR in the western entrance, becoming VFR quite quickly. For the day Thursday, Chilcoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, kind of an east to west orientation of the isotherms there, or the height lines, 2,000 feet right across, or just north of Iliamna Lake to 6,000 feet across Sitkinak Island there, and then south, well south of the or the eastern or the southeast coast, with the surface off the coast, and for icing, possible mixed. Isolated moderate rime or mixed icing for the southern panhandle, and some light rime icing possibly sliding into the Alaska range there, shifting north over the northern Bering Sea and a little bit out over the western Aleutians. Nothing too terribly significant. And the jet stream, good jet, 140 knots from the southwest out toward the Komodorskis, take a turn to the west, and diminished to about 110 knots northern Bering Sea, northwest 130 there right across the western Alaska range, diving well south of the Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, 85 knot northwesterlies blowing across the western Alaska range and through the Barren Islands. 3,000 feet northwest, 50 to 60 knots from Prince William Sound down across Kodiak Island, about 45 knot west northwesterly southwest interior, pretty light up to the north, really light for the Panhandle. Southerlies 35 of the Aleutians. That'll result in moderate chop below 6,000 feet, Adak and Atka, on out to about Amchitka. And also considerable moderate mechanical turbulence south central Alaska, Kenai Peninsula, lee side of the Alaska range there down to the Aleutian range.
Some places on the surface you might have these steep cracks and giant fissures that you would have to be careful not to fall into. In other places you might see towers of ice right next to places that were relatively smooth. You might see places that were dark. Ice there takes the form of rock. It's frozen solid until you dig down into that ocean. So you may see some things that look similar to Earth, but you may see some things that are very different.
That voice you just heard?
I am Morgan Kramer, NASA scientist.
I love it.
That's Morgan. She's probably one of NASA's best spokespeople for exploring our solar system's icy moons.
Europa is a fascinating place. It has this liquid water ocean that's about 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a lot of water.
To understand what makes Earth so special, sometimes you need to back up and take in the big picture. Remember, the cryosphere is every place on Earth with frozen water. And water is one of the biggest indicators for life.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it.
And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of with life. Although Europa isn't the only icy moon in our solar system, NASA has identified it as one of those places with key astrobiological potential. Morgan is a collaborator on the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa, an instrument selected for NASA's next mission to Jupiter's icy moon Europa. But she's also more than just a scientist working in a laboratory. She's preparing future NASA missions for success on the surface of alien worlds. This year, Morgan and her colleagues were in the field studying how life colonizes in fresh lava.
Earth, it turns out, has a lot of excellent, what we call analog environments, places that are similar enough to some of these other worlds that we can conduct some tests and we can do some analyses here. Now, they're not perfect, of course. They're not going to be exactly like Europa, but we can still learn a lot by testing in these environments. Some of these places include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle, but there are other places too, Alaska, Greenland, even Iceland. Any place where you have a lot of ice, because guess what the surface of Europa is made of? A lot of ice.
Studying the cryosphere doesn't just have big implications for Earth. It also matters for the frozen worlds in our own cosmic backyard.
If we're able to find life or evidence of past life on a place like Europa, that tells us that not only can life happen in other places, but it's common enough that it happened at least twice in the same tiny solar system. That means that the universe is wide open in terms of how much life we might find, the types of life we might find. It would revolutionize how we see ourselves and the possibilities for contact in the universe. It would be amazing. Oh, it's so exciting.
As it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. So it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving. My interest in glaciers comes from the sheer size of these things and how much they're able to change on human timescales. And so the amount of mass and energy being transferred by glaciers around the globe is tremendous. It's an absolutely fascinating thing to study from space.
Mountain glaciers are some of the most charismatic parts of the cryosphere. Some might cling to the edges of cliffs at higher elevations, then lay bare and flat in a broad plain, looking cracked and weathered like elephant skin, before tumbling thousands of feet toward the sea and terminating in a dramatic calving front. They're like motion frozen in time, until they aren't. They tell a story about the distant past and yet are incredibly responsive to the present. You can understand why they'd be captivating to all of us, and especially cryospheric scientists. Meet Alex Gardner, a cryospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who's going to help break down what a classic West Coast North American glacier might look like, where high amounts of snow dump onto the mountains.
And at higher elevations, there's melt in summer, but not enough melt to get rid of all of that snow. And so that snow accumulates, it compacts, it turns into ice, and it starts to flow under its own weight, and it flows down the valleys. And as it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out and down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving.
Alex uses satellite data to study large-scale changes in glacial ice. But 2,000 miles to the north, Chris Larson from the University of Alaska Fairbanks spends a lot of time studying glaciers from the air. He's been flying over Alaskan mountain glaciers for many years, most recently on a NASA-funded mission called Operation Icebridge Alaska. He's absolutely enamored with his local rivers of ice.
And what do you love about mountain glaciers?
Well, they're in mountains, so they're really pretty.
You couldn't ask for a better way to experience Alaska on a large scale than to go flying around for campaign after campaign and look at all of the mountains in Alaska. Truly infinite. You just feel like you'll never see the end of them, and you don't want to either.
But Chris doesn't spend weeks away from home and family for the views. Chris and his colleagues at NASA want to answer some pretty big questions by learning more about Alaskan glaciers and how they tick.
You know, why does NASA care about these? Well, they actually disproportionately contribute a large amount to sea level rise.
In the long run, as the Earth warms due to climate change, the big ice sheets and mighty outlet glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica stand to contribute the most to sea level rise, simply because the vast majority of the planet's ice is stored there. But currently, it's the world's smaller mountain glaciers, in comparatively warmer places, like Alaska and Patagonia, that are contributing about 1/3 of all inputs to sea level rise, even though they account for only 1% of the world's ice.
Mostly due to them being dynamic. They have water at the bed, which allows them to slide fast, and they react quickly to climate change and have higher velocities than their polar counterparts.
Back at JPL, AKwx uses satellite measurements of global ice and computer models to predict ultimately how much sea level rise we might see due to climate change. But in the case of mountain glaciers, we also care about the local impacts of disappearing ice.
When we think of changes in ice sheets, we typically think of just what is the consequence for sea level rise and the future evolution of the ice sheets. But glaciers in other regions, like high mountain Asia, Alaska, the European Alps, these are places where changes in runoff matters to stream flows. In places like high mountain Asia, you have a lot of glaciers that feed the streams that flow down to populated regions. And that runoff becomes significant for water resources, irrigation, and agriculture.
Both AKwx and Chris are passionate about understanding how glaciers are changing and what it means for our planet's future. They'll continue to use tools like elevation maps from the ICESat-2 satellite and detailed airborne measurements to monitor changing ice.
By the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at sea ice analysis from December 19th and then comparing it to today's, you'll see it retreats back to the west and north, or back to the east and northeast, all across the entire ice edge there. Let's see, going to today's analysis, you can see especially the white area taking a pretty good jog back to the east and northeast there. And that pattern is going to continue for probably the next 5 to 7 days. There'll be definitely no sea ice advancement at all, and then it'll be retreating and compacting at various stages throughout the next several days. Moving on to coastal water forecast. North to northeast winds 20 knots on the south coast of the Panhandle. North winds 20 knots for the north coast. Seas around 12 feet there for the entire stretch of the coastline. Small craft advisories, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channels for north winds 25 to 30 knots. Clarence Strait, north 15, but gale force gust of 40 knots. Seas only about 3 feet. For Friday, Clarence Strait, north winds 20 knots. Otherwise, small craft advisories, Stevens Passage, north winds 25 knots, seas 5 feet. Cold northerly gales for Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channels at 35 knots, seas up to 7 feet. 25 to 30 knot small craft advisory level winds for the south coast, and northeast 25 to 30 knots for the north coast. Prince William Sound, gale warnings tomorrow. Northwest 35 knots, seas up to 9 feet with storm force gust of 50 knots. Eastern North Gulf Coast, Middleton Island area, northwest at 40 knots. Western North Gulf Coast, high-end gales west 45 knots. And then we've got a storm warning out for the Barren Islands. Northwesterlies at 50 knots. And pretty good west wind, gale force westerlies, Kamishak Bay, 45 knots, 16-foot seas. Southern Cook Inlet, gale force westerlies, 40 knots with seas up to 13 feet in the ice-free areas, 20 knots out of the west for Northern Cook Inlet. Much lighter winds for Cook Inlet on Friday, northerlies 10 to 15 knots, and coming down even under gale force for Kamishak Bay, northwest 30 knots. Minimum gales for the Barren Islands, northwest at 35. North Gulf Coast, northerlies 20 to 25 knots, and winds back down to 15 knots for Prince William Sound, the seas subsiding to 2 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, westerlies 30 to 35 knots, 12-foot seas. Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 20 knots, seas 7 to 9 feet. Small craft advisories, Bristol Bay, west 25, seas and ice-free waters at 5 feet. Those will be southwest at 15 on Friday for Bristol Bay, And for the Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest, 20 to 25 knots. Kodiak Island, east side there, northwest 30 knots. Shelikof Strait, west at 15. Fox Island, south winds 20 to 25 knots tomorrow, seas 8 to 10 feet. Small craft advisories, AKwx. South 25 knots, southeast 25 knots from Chitka Island. 30 knot winds from the south from Kiska to Shimia, seas at about 16 feet. Those turn northeast and come down to 25 knots from Shimia to Kiska, seas about 14 feet. Gale warnings for Chitka Island, southeast at 35 knots with 20-foot seas. Gale warnings also for AKwx, southeast 35 knots. And for the Fox Island small craft advisory, south winds 25 to 30 knots. Southwest coast small craft advisory, southwest 25 knots, seas running 9 to 11 feet. And southwest 25 knots also for St. George, St. Paul, St. Matthew Islands. St. Lawrence Island, north at 20 knots, and only a 10-knot breeze for Norton Sound out of the north. That'll turn east at 15 for Norton Sound on Friday, northeast 30 knots. Brisk wind advisory, St. Lawrence Island. Swell craft advisories for the southwest coast, south 25 knots, south 30 knots for the Pribilof, southeast 25, St. Matthew Island. Still pretty breezy. Brisk wind advisories for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, but not quite as windy as today. West 25 to 30 knots, strongest toward demarcation point. Central coast, central and west side, west at 15. Northwest 15 from Cape Beaufort to Wales. Taking a look at Friday, 10 to 15 knot north to northeast winds from Wales to Cape Beaufort. Otherwise, central western Arctic coast, winds west 15 knots. East side, west winds 20 to 30 knots. For tonight, improving conditions up along the Arctic coast, still getting clipped by Arctic trough swinging around a deep low up near Banks Island. Otherwise, a lot of moisture, frontal action, producing widespread area of snow across the interior. And that moisture will clip the central and southern coastal areas of the Panhandle tomorrow as it drops southeastward. Winter weather advisories 2 to 5 inches from Sitka to Heidelberg. Areas of light snow, southern Alaska. More snow and blowing snow, central eastern Arctic coast. Another push of warm air into the Bering Sea up to the south.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.